There are some big misconceptions around budgeting and financial planning, and starting with the word itself, the word budget. I think a lot of people recoil at it. It's like, no, I don't want to go on a financial diet. It's not about that at all.
This episode is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Hello and welcome to the Investing Insiders podcast, where we help you achieve financial well-being by making smarter money decisions. I'm Brianne, and in today's episode, we're going to be looking at some of the things that we can do to make us feel more comfortable and confident when it comes to our finances. Today, we're joined by a financial educator and the fairy godmother of household finances, Lucy Pryor, to help us unpack what it means to be more confident with money and how to get things started. Lucy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, this is going to be a great episode to get into. I think a lot of people often just feel that sense of dread sometimes when it comes to finances. So I guess to kick things off, what are some of the big reasons that make us feel that level of taboo when it comes to talking about money or, thinking about money or taking action towards our finances?
Yeah, such a good question. And I think, we are talking about it more now, but of course, for the last numerous years, we haven't talked about it. And the age range of your listeners here are going to be obviously quite varied. But from my perspective, sort of my friends' 40s, 50s, and even in their 60s, this just was never discussed, as we were growing up. It just wasn't. I was laughing as I was sort of thinking about this. And in terms of the cultural backdrop to our growing up in the sort of the 80s and 90s, we absorbed TV programs that actually money was discussed, but it was just through the lens of class. On television, you'd see entertainment shows purely based on snobbery, things like, Keeping Up Appearances and The Good Life. And you got Only Fools and Horses, Fawlty Towers, all of those sorts of things. And that's really how we absorbed money. And the conversation itself just never happened. We didn't learn this stuff at school. I think the closest I ever got to it was home economics. Yes, it taught me how to sew, for goodness sake. I mean, this isn't the 1950s, this is in the 80s. But it did teach me how to do a budget and how to actually look after a family, based in terms of food preparation. So there was an element to education, but it was very limited.
It's really interesting sort of thinking about it in such the early stages of life and looking at school, looking at classes and home economics and things like that. Kind of how early do you think these conversations about money could start to happen, just to kind of ease the conversation a bit more?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I know that our most formative, age is around the age of 7. So what we're learning the most in terms of how we're copying our parents, and everything is in front of us that we're emulating. So I think, it can start at any age. I think a lot of us, when we're little, under the age of 10, we're getting probably pocket money. So I think education can start as young as that. You can be at home, you could be earning some pocket money for doing chores around the house, and equating money as being something you earn in exchange for doing something that it takes some of your time or some of your knowledge, some of your skills.
I think that's a really good point. The idea of the exchange of value. I think especially as we're kind of going through the technological age and everything's becoming a lot more digital, it's sometimes difficult to conceptualize, the beeping of your phone or a card and paying for something. Like I remember back in nursery and things like that, and you'd actually have toy money. So you'd have like the little coins and the pennies, and there was that idea of, I'm going to buy this pretend loaf of bread and here's 5p for it. So yeah, having that idea of exchange, I think, is so important.
Yeah, playing shops, funnily enough, was one of my most favourite games as a kid growing up. And actually, our granddaughter, we've just bought her like a shop as a toy. And understanding how you do that exchange is really important, because, of course, that's what we've done since the dawn of time. We've exchanged something for something. I grow vegetables, I'll exchange you for some fruit. That's life, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I really love that. I'm sure she's going to absolutely adore the shop and getting into that as well. It's, just one of those things. And I think when you think about exposure and you think about maybe some of the concepts of money that you might have been introduced to, maybe through school, play, watching TV, as you get older, you don't really tend to think or get the time to sit down and wonder, how do I really feel about money? What is my relationship to money? Does finance make me feel confident or am I comfortable talking about it? What are some of the reasons, when people get into their older years that maybe they might just feel like they can't really talk about it as much? Like, I think, when you're at school, you might be able to say, okay, yes, let's go and play shots or let's do this. But I guess when you get older, there's this assumption that you have it all figured out. And, you know, a lot of us don't.
Oh, no, we don't have it all figured out. But it's interesting because we talked a little bit about when you're young and you're playing shops, but actually when you get to the teenage years, that can change things again. And I know for me, I was one of the few kids at school as a teenager where my parents got divorced. And I had money tokens, lunch tokens. And there's a huge stigma to that. All of the bully girls at school used to be quite mean to me. And that was just, so from then you get that stigma attached to you, and that relationship towards money can actually, without you realizing it, start to stick. So when you go through your teenage years, you may or may not go to university, then you start work, and you've got a lot of these beliefs underlying before you even started. And I think especially when you go to university, you start your adult life with all of that debt. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but your confidence around money is absolutely shaped in segments all the way through life.
And at what stage do you think these types of thoughts and these patterns might start to emerge? So I guess let's have a look at where you might not have that great of an attachment to the idea of money, how to manage it. In what ways might this start to appear in later life?
In later life, well, I think most of us learn the hard way. I think we're in a situation now, of course, where understanding money is becoming a lot more interesting, a lot more gamified, a lot more relevant and emotionally resonant for the 18 to 25 group, because they're seeing it all the time on TikTok and different social media. And again, we can cover sort of thoughts on social media in a while, but for those of us sort of 40 and over, things look very, very different. So some of us can head off into our early 20s, get our first jobs. And of course, when you start earning money, invariably your bank starts to offer you money as well, in terms of overdrafts, in terms of credit cards. And unless you really know what you're doing or have a sensible head on your shoulders or have some education, you think, oh, lovely, free money. The actual concept of having to pay it back just doesn't enter the picture. Or if it does enter the picture, it seems such a far-fetched scenario, and you've no idea about how interest works. So what you realise, oh, good, I've just bought myself something or some things. I've put £1,000 on a credit card. Oh, well, big whoop. And then suddenly that £1,000 becomes £1,200, becomes £1,500 if you're not paying it back properly. And then you start to realise you're getting yourself in a bit of trouble here before you know what you're doing. You're then probably because you're earning not much money, suddenly this little bit of debt becomes bigger. And if you're not careful, you're in a bit of an ever decreasing circle. And that's where it can all start.
And I suppose it's a bit of a snowball effect, isn't it? Because, it starts off with, one thing, and it can easily spiral, particularly with, like you mentioned, interest rates and things like that. What are some of the ways that people can start to look at maybe when these things come up and just start to take action? Because it's quite easy, especially with things like credit, to kick it under the rug and just think, I'll deal with it tomorrow, or, I'm going to shift it onto this lower interest card, or, there are different ways that you can kind of put a plaster over it. How do you take that a step further and just say, okay, it's time to make a real change and get things on the right track?
Yeah, that's massive. That's a really big identity shift, I feel, because you get to the point where, and quite often it's when you approach a big birthday, you're approaching 30, you're approaching 40, things start to look very different, and you want different things for yourself. You want to become a version of yourself that has perhaps a bit more together than you have experienced thus far. And I think when you're constantly kicking problems down the road, at some point you think, this is going to meet me again around every single corner. I need to deal with this. And it then starts to feel heavy. And that's when shame can start to kick in, or a bit of guilt because you should have dealt with it earlier. Then you start saying, I should have, and then it starts feeling heavy. So, of course, the conversation around money does start to feel heavy, and it does start to feel a bit stressful, because you've kind of caused this problem for yourself, perhaps, that you could have done something about it sooner. But we've all done it. We've all done it. I know I've done it. I've wanted to go on holiday with my friends in my 20s. I didn't have enough savings. I put it on a credit card. Yes, I paid it off. But of course, if I weren't diligently doing so, because I got a mortgage really early, actually, I was only 25 and I was by myself, and that's another long story for another time, perhaps. But when you're on your own, you've got one income coming in, you feel very vulnerable. you feel quite exposed, you feel quite naked, financially naked. And this is where it can really sting more than if you've got two incomes for one mortgage. So yeah, point being, I've done it. We've all done it. It's part of the learning process of going through your 20s. You do live it up and enjoy the money that you're earning for the first time in your adult life.
I think that's really, really valuable. That idea that you might make a decision that doesn't necessarily lead to where you want to be financially, but that doesn't mean you have to be stuck there. Like, there are ways to turn it around if you choose to. One of the things that you said that I really liked was the idea of, accepting where you are and not letting the shame and everything like that creep in. Could you kind of dig into that a little bit more and maybe share some tips and tactics to separate where you are from feeling this sense of judgment around it? Because I think, as you mentioned before, it's that judgment that keeps you stuck or stops you from taking action.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, funny enough, I wrote a blog on pretty much this week, and there's a whole neuroscience piece that backs this up, and it goes back to that identity piece that I just mentioned. So if I frame it around some of the language that we use for ourselves, so for example, you'll hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, I'm in debt," but actually, you are not in debt. You have some debt. And I think when you're framing it or reframing things for yourself, and the way you speak to yourself about this is really important. Actually, when you have something, when you've made a decision and you feel guilty about it, or you've perpetually kicked that can down the road and now you're feeling really ashamed about it, all of these things are practical things, logical things that you can take a logical approach towards. However, of course, you've got to find that bridge between the knowing and the doing. And this is where it gets really hard. Bridging that gap it can feel impossible sometimes. I often equate how we approach money and use like nutrition and diet and stuff like that. It's, really similar to, you think, okay, I need to get on the scales. I really don't want to. Okay, I'll get on the scales. You squint, you think, oh my God, it's even worse than I had imagined. And then you think, right, that's it. I'm going on a diet. I'm going to clear the cupboards of all the naughty things I've got in there. So you eat it all. I mean, why do we do that? But we do it. And then you can think, right, now at the end of the month or on Monday, I'll tackle this logically. But you can't really very efficiently because you've still not bridged that emotional gap between the two things. It's such a big difference between knowing and doing. As I mentioned, the neuroscience behind it is really interesting. And, I know Nike are absolutely famous for the just do it. But what really bothers me is when people say, well-meaningly, but they just say, oh, just do a budget. There's no such thing as just doing anything of that nature. And I'll explain why. When there's a real emotional charge to something, a particular task, and it could be fear, it could be shame, it could be overwhelm, your limbic system can effectively veto the whole prefrontal cortex's good intentions. Okay, so your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system, two separate parts of the brain. One tells you what to do logically, and the other one is like a stubborn mule and says, yeah, but I can't, or whatever it might be. The rational brain knows what needs doing. But the just do it advice therefore is largely useless, because when it comes to financial anxiety, if you're not feeling it, you're just not going to do it. When you think about that Nike, they have a really great tagline, but just do it works brilliantly only when you've got a mild hesitation in doing something. So say, for example, you're a runner and you go out 3 or 4 times a week running. If you don't feel like going out this morning, you happen to look at your trainers with the Nike ticker on the side. Other brands are available, but it's going to give you that gentle nudge that you need. It's that little gentle kick of inspiration. Go on, you can do it. Yeah, all right, I'll go and do it. But it all falls apart when the task already is overwhelming to you, or you lack any confidence or skill, or when maybe the reward is really distant and totally abstract. Just do it. Just layers on self-blame. Just do a budget. Just do it. Just doesn't work in this scenario. In terms of the override, there's some things you can do. I'll just quickly list 5 things because, and I'll caveat by saying, and this is absolutely true, we buy with our emotions and we justify with logic, and we do it every single time.
Absolutely. And I guess a lot of investment goes into making sure you're emotionally triggered to prompt you to buy. Like, marketing and advertising budgets are big for a reason. So
exactly that.
anyone feeling like, oh my gosh, no, I've fallen for it again. It's been designed that way. So
of course it has. When you're flicking through, any algorithmic thing from Pinterest to Instagram, it is very intelligently designed by engineers to make it so they want you to stay on that platform. They know what you like looking at. If you love interior design or fashion, they will make sure you see more of it so you stay on there longer. And of course, the problem with that is you realize all the things you don't have. And it has that less effect, which again, we can talk about, but it's the neuroscience behind it is really essential that, you kind of have an understanding of it, because otherwise you do just relentlessly feel that level of shame. And it's not your fault. You're probably a very good person. You're a very nice person. You work hard, you do your best, but there is a genuine reason why you can't make the attachment between the knowing and the doing.
That is a huge gem. And it would be great to kind of, take that even a step further. So, really separating that idea of the impulse from, action. And also what I really love about your breakdown is blanket phrases aren't necessarily going to motivate you to make a change. Putting those little systems in place is probably going to have a bigger effect. And also, people process information very differently. People handle information very differently. For some, numbers might be very overwhelming. For others, having more of a vision might be helpful. It's really about finding out what works for you, is what I'm getting from this.
Yeah, exactly that. And there is no one size fits all. It's called personal finance for a reason. And we all learn differently. For somebody, their absolute nirvana is a spreadsheet. They absolutely adore them. And whilst I know I'm happy with them, I design them simply because I hate the generic ones, because to me, it's just a sea of numbers and it confuses me. It adds a layer of complexity I'm not interested in. It doesn't look nice enough. It's not aesthetically pleasing. But, you might think, oh, it's just a silly. No, having an aesthetically pleasing tool that you can use, whether that's a notebook or whatever it is, it actually helps you neurologically to process the task you're about to do so that you want to do it. It makes you want to do it. Other people are very visual learners, and I've actually got a huge A3 calendar next to me on the wall and a load of post-it notes, because I like things to be rather visual as well. I don't like things tucked away on a Google sheet, although I use Google for everything and note-taking, and I like things to be easily accessible. And I like things that I can easily see. It just takes away some of that friction. And I think when you find something difficult, removing elements of it that causes that friction in the first place is the right way to go. Take, for example, again, about the whole going out running thing. If you find that one of your frictions is, your partner's still asleep, then you want to go out running early, and that, the sound of you going in your drawer to get your running gear out is a problem, you'll use that as an excuse not to go running. You get your stuff out the night before. We know this stuff. It just means that you're giving yourself an extra nudge in the right direction. You're helping yourself.
Yeah, it's almost making it really, really difficult to quit. Basically, it's almost just laying out the groundwork. It's like, even if, you wake up a bit later, whatever, everything's laid out for you. You just got to get going with it. So thinking about the budgeting aspect of things, it's something that underpins making sure that you've got, enough to cover your expenses, or even just identifying if you have enough to cover your expenses with everything that's going on. For somebody who is new to budgeting, what is the first step to make sure that they, first of all, get themselves a system that works? And then I guess from that point, they can customize it and then start, making it something that works for them.
Absolutely.
This episode of the Investing Insiders podcast is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Saxo provides access to a broad range of global assets through a sophisticated trading platform. You can trade US stocks from as little as $1 per trade and UK stocks from $3 per trade. Please remember that all investing involves risk. The value of your investments can go down as well as up, and you could get back less than you invest. Terms and conditions apply. Visit Saxo Markets to learn more.
One of my favourite things to talk about, I think it's so massively underrated, and it's when you get that foundation piece right in the first place. And like you say, you've got a system that suits you, the way your brain works, the way your family works together, how your income works, how your outgoing, how your bills work, all of those things mesh together that makes your life and not your best friend's life. Your friend will probably budget or manage their money very differently. I think there are some big misconceptions around budgeting and financial planning. And for anybody starting out doing this fairly new, and again, that doesn't matter what age you are, you could be doing this for the first time after losing your partner who's always done it for you as a household. You might be 50 and doing this for the first time yourself. Starting with the word itself, the word budget. I think a lot of people recoil at it. It's like, no, I don't want to go on a financial diet. It's not about that at all. Budgeting does not mean deprivation. It means it is a good plan. It's like getting a diary at the start of the year, which is one of my most pleasurable things that I like to do at the start of the year. Right, whose birthday's when are the anniversaries, when are we going on holiday, what great things are coming up. It's the same principle. What does this year look like for us as a family? Let's get this onto a calendar so we can see it, and let's see how we can match our money to what we want to do. And I think that's the first step, is when you're thinking about budgeting, it's not what the numbers are telling you that you can do. It's saying, this is what we want to do. Let's make the numbers fit what we want to do. And then when you've got that aspect of it, you're not going to start going into, I don't know, B&M Home and coming out £50 lighter. You're not, because you realise actually you are going to have a really super holiday this year as a family. And that £50 goes into the pot for your holiday, not for a bunch of tat that you're going to have even forgotten you bought. Do you know what I mean? We all do that as well. So it's no judgment, but it's refining your thought process to make sure that your lifestyle, you've looked ahead for the next 12 months, what's really important and meaningful for you. Now, how do you make the money fit that picture?
Absolutely. I think it's that idea of, I guess, redirecting the money. So it's not that you're cutting things out, so to speak. It's, can I spend less here and put it towards, say, the holiday or any other aspiration that you might have financially? So it's not like a loss. It's, I'm just moving it to this thing, which I think is way more empowering than, oh my gosh, I'm so restricted now that I'm budgeting.
That's so right. And another bit of neuroscience for you is there's proper psychology behind avoidance and loss. It's called loss aversion, actually. And it was kind of brought around in the late 1970s from this huge research piece. And actually the person went on to win a Nobel Prize, apparently, which is very exciting. But actually, they found that the pain of losing is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. And they called that the loss aversion. So applying this to your everyday finances, if you're opening the app or avoiding opening the app or reviewing your bank statement, there's a real psychological risk in that act. You might find something bad. You're not going to want to look at it. It's something you can't unsee once you've seen it. Because when your brain processes potential loss as roughly twice as threatening as the potential gain, if you're thinking, the rational calculation will be, well, knowing is better than not knowing. It gets completely overridden by that emotional one. But what if I find something really awful? So we don't look, not because you don't care, but because you looking feels like it might cost you something. And normally that cost is something very, very deep and meaningful, like your peace of mind or your hope. And that actually has a huge impact on how you feel, on your mental health. Again, it's like going back to the food principle. It's like, your jeans are too tight. You don't really want to go on a diet, but at some point you do have to say, right, okay, I do really need to sort this out. So you then move into that sort of pleasure savings paradox. This is the pain of not having something that we want. And it often feels greater than the pleasure of having savings. So savings for most of us are kind of an abstract. You put money away. It's literally just numbers, in a bank statement somewhere. Future security is invisible because, as humans, we're not really hardwired to plan that far ahead. The thing you're not buying right now, however, whether that's the holiday, that lovely new sofa that you really want, or you want to buy a new outfit, that feels like a really concrete and immediate loss. You can picture it. You can feel its absence. So that's why savings or creating savings are so psychologically difficult, even when people intellectually want to save. It's not a willpower failure. It's your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's the financial system around us, as we've mentioned, frictionless, avoiding or making things frictionless. All that one-click purchasing that we mentioned right at the beginning, the buy now, pay laters, every checkout. It's all perfectly engineered for this exact thing. When I was a child, everything was either cash or check. There wasn't anything else. Once your money has gone, it had gone. And that's why you had to budget very carefully, or portion control, as I like to call it. You had to portion control your money properly. Because if you ran out and you couldn't afford to do something, then you didn't do it. It's as simple as that.
So I think that raises such an important point when it comes to looking at credit and what purpose it serves in somebody's financial life, basically, because ultimately there is a role for it if it comes to, say, using your credit card to earn rewards, but you're making sure you pay that balance back each month in full to avoid getting interest and things like that. Alternatively, there are other, types. So there's the balance transfer if you're trying to work out a way to reduce how much debt you're paying over time and things like that too. For anybody who is thinking, okay, it's okay if I don't have enough in my account, I'll just use my credit card or buy now, pay later. What are some of the alarm bells they should be thinking about when it comes to that type of strategy? Because as we kind of mentioned before, it can easily snowball.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a couple of points on this, and credit really and truly, as you said, it isn't the enemy. Chaos is your enemy. It's the not knowing. It's the not understanding. It's the not using it creatively. It's the not using it strategically or intentionally. When you're using it in that way, in a very intelligent way, to make your good personal cash flow system work for you, then that's all well and good. As you say, paying it off either in full or as near as damn it, that is absolutely fine. Let's bung it on the card is not a spending strategy. It's never going to work for you. However, I will put one little caveat in there. Spontaneity is one of the sparks of life. So take, for example, you've got your budget all planned out and your friend rings up and says, oh, this band's playing. We absolutely love this band and it's £100 a ticket. You think, oh, it's not in my budget. I don't really have the money, but I really want to go. Do you know what? Use that credit sensibly, in as much that you can retrospectively fit that into your budget. And you've still got to live. You've still got to enjoy your life, guilt-free. That's freedom. It's having choices. But it's the bunging it on the credit card and letting it fester on a 29.5% interest rate forever, ever, ever. Some people live this way. They sort of have a really interesting thought process. So, for example, I had somebody I spoke with a while back, and she said if she had £3,000 on her credit card balance, it might go up to 3.5. It might go down to 2,800, but it kind of bubbled away at £3,000, and that's where she was at. That was her comfort level. She expected to live with a credit card with about £3,000 on it. And it's not until you get the calculator out and say, okay, that's fine. But all of, when was that shopping trip? Oh, it was such and that. They had a sale on. I'm like, okay, you got all of those bargains in the sale. Yeah. I said, that's now cost you 30% more or whatever it would be over the course of the months and the years to pay it back. Yeah. Okay. So not so much a bargain then. No, perhaps not. And it's just having that way of looking at credit, because it can be your ally. It can get you out of trouble. It can bring joy into your life. It can create that spontaneity that you're craving or you have the option for. But it's, as long as it's used sensibly, you've got to be able to use it as a best friend and not someone who doesn't like you very much.
That is such an interesting perspective. And I think really thinking about things in that way is so important as well. So that idea of, okay, I'm going to put some money on my credit card to make the most of a sale that's happening now. But if you're not strategic about it, you may actually end up paying way more than the sale price in the long term if you're not covering those things off. So I think that's a really valuable way of looking at things. When looking at, household finances, and let's say you've got your budget, you're looking at things, and one of the biggest expenses that we have, it boils down to housing and bills and the essentials like food and things like that. If somebody's looking at that portion of their spreadsheet or their budgeting app and they're thinking, how do I even go about making some savings here?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And this is the thing that takes a little bit of time, and it is a little bit dull. Let's be honest, it's not that exciting to do for most people, which is another reason why a lot of us don't do it as much as we should. But when you've got your portions, so your portions are pretty simple. If you like these 3 pots, then go ahead. It's sustained me throughout my whole life. So it's the stuff you need to spend your money on, you can't live without. It's your savings, put that next, because what you've got left over between your essentials and your income is obviously looks a lot bigger at that point. So you feel like you can afford to put some savings away, do that next. Then what you've got left over is what you've got to spend. And it might not look as much as you would like. And let's be honest, with the cost of living crisis rumbling on and on and on for like 5-6 years now, it feels like there's never end in sight. Then it is never going to look, or certainly not this year, it's certainly not going to look that different. So what can you do? So when you look at all of your essentials, this is where I get a little bit of tough love with myself and with anybody that I speak to. Is it really an essential? Because if it is, great. And it's not for me to tell you what an essential is or isn't. I'm not going to say, oh, you're drinking too many lattes. I don't care what you do. You care what you do. If you want to go out and have X, Y, Z, and you classify that as a need, for example, I had a lady I spoke to and we looked and she had like 4 different television subscriptions that were like 80 plus quid a month.
It's easily done because they're all, about maybe £10 each now. And it's just like, I don't really know the value of, having all of them spread out so much. It's becoming a lot more than just say like the satellite subscription you'd get before all the different streaming platforms came out.
Quite right. Now, to me, that's absurd. However, to her, with a disabled son, that was essential because it kept him entertained and educated a lot of the time because of the different platforms that she wanted for him. And you know what? Who am I to say? I'm nobody. What's important for her is important for her, and that's all there is to it. But the fact is that we looked at it and we examined it and she classified it as something that was essential in her life. Great. It stays in the essential pot. When hand on heart, you've gone through with a fine tooth comb and you've decided that everything that needs to stay stays, that you've earned the money, you decide where it goes. So whatever you've got left over is what you've got left over. Now, what I always talk about is having that planful mindset and that use of the calendar that I mentioned. And so if you've got a friend's wedding coming up, or you want to go away for the weekend, or you want to host a nice barbecue party, or, that weekend, whatever it might be, knowing what's coming, you can just, flex, ebb and flow your portions as need be. And this is where that planning element comes in, because some months, just because you've got £200 left in your bank account doesn't mean to say you can spend it or you should spend it. Leave it, pop it into a savings account and come back to it in 3 months' time when you want it, because actually you've got a friend's wedding and you want it for then. So just because you got it doesn't mean to say you should spend it. Keep that buffer. That's really important as well. So you've gone through like a fine tooth comb. You absolutely know what your essentials are. You know what you've got in your savings and how much you can, again, some months will be more you can put in your savings. Some months, maybe you can't put anything in your savings because things are pretty to the bone. Fine. That's the way it is sometimes. That's life. That's the leverage. That's the push-pull. And then whatever you've got left over is what you've got left over. If you overspend some months, you can figure out, again, using that planful approach, when you can reel it in or rein it back, and other times when you can be a little bit more flexible with it. So I think as long as you're happy with it, how hard you've worked to earn it. If you've worked 40 plus hours a week earning it, I think it's probably a very good idea to spend 30 minutes a week deciding where it goes. And
for people who have, shared households, how important is it to have this conversation as a group? If it's you're living with a partner or you have a larger family, or even if you're living with housemates, how important is it to kind of sit down and come together about these types of things?
I think we've all been there on more than one occasion when we've gone out for dinner and you're the one who's driving and you've had one plate of food while everybody else has gorged on 5 courses and drunk a bottle of wine each. And so suddenly your bill that should be 25 quid is now 150 and you feel a little bit disgruntled about it. But maybe it swings and roundabouts and actually your turn will come. And if it all evens out in a group of friendships, that's fine. However, in my experience, depending on that relationship, you can feel a little bit taken for granted and things are not fair and not balanced. In which case, if you're having that conversation up front and you decide how you're going to approach it, then it negates any friction between you further down the line. And actually having those little check-ins every now and again. So again, take, for example, friends come to stay with you for a week or you go on a group holiday. Up front, you might say, right, let's all put £200, £300 in the kitty. Let's all treat it with respect. When it's gone, it's gone. And then we all agree we're going to put another 15 or whatever it is. You agree that up front, and invariably that should make sure that everybody gets on and has a lovely, lovely time. But I think it's when you don't talk about it that it causes the problems.
Definitely. I mean, I guess what's been really interesting about this conversation is the idea of everybody having a slightly different emotional connection to money, which might affect how they speak about it, how confident they feel in managing it, and how quick they are to take action if things aren't on the right track. For anybody who might be living with a partner, say, and it's quite clear that they both just have very different approaches to money. What are some of the tips that can help them get on the same page at least? And even if, one might be more of a spender, one might be more of a saver, are there any ways to kind of have a balance where they have that kind of joint financial page that works, and then, their personal financial relationships where they can kind of do what they want?
Wow, we're entering the world of couples therapy. And it can get very, very, very messy, but it can also, of course, be a lovely thing to behold. So this is one of probably the keystones in any relationship. When you decide to live together, when you decide to marry, whatever that looks like for you, there'll be certain things in your values, your personal values, your lifestyle values that you cherish and are not up for compromise. And there'll be other things that you are prepared to compromise on. Those things are completely personal. Now, money is one of those things, as any divorce lawyer will tell you, that is one of the most emotive subjects out there. Money is money. It's typically a logical thing. It's just an exchange thing, but it isn't. It really isn't. It comes down to fairness. It comes down to expectations, and it underpins your life. So with a partner, of course, you've got to decide what you both consider to be a good way to live. And some couples put all their money into one pot together, share it, evenly, balanced, fairly, and it just works because it just works for them because they talk about it in that way. For others, they keep their accounts separately and they put into a third tertiary account that they use as a couple, and they do. So there's a whole different set of scenarios that you might want to use practically. But ultimately, as a couple, only you two know, because you have to talk about it, is what is going to be acceptable to you. Because in any relationship that is a long-term relationship, I'm guessing we're talking long-term stuff here, life partners, not just you're moving in with somebody for maybe a few months or a year, or this is something that you are choosing to do life with. When you're choosing to do life with somebody, this is part of that uncomfortable adult level conversation that you have to have on the regular. Because, it can be very easy for one partner to feel like this is unfair or it's imbalanced. And then things can go awry because it won't stop at just the money conversation. Other things will creep in as well. So getting that right off the bat, I think, is essential.
And for anybody who is, I guess, managing their budget solo and thinking, okay, I'm going to get started with this, but I feel like I need some kind of accountability partner, or just, someone or a community to kind of bounce ideas off of and stay on track, in the same way that, if you're going to start a project or something, you might have a support group or just a team of people working with you. With money, sometimes it can feel a little bit isolating because it's like, okay, I've realized this is what I need to do. Now I need to make it happen. What are some of the ways that people can make sure that they surround themselves with the community that they need to, either stick to their budgets or take the leap into making a savings pot, investing, that type of thing?
Really good question. And something that I'm just learning about now. So it's probably been going for some time, but loud budgeting, again, in that younger age group, is becoming really fashionable. And actually talking about what you're not buying, or talking about what you're doing to maintain your current budget expectations, is becoming a really wonderful part of the conversation. And I applaud that. I think, again, from that age group perspective, there's a lot of differences. If we have the same conversation in 10 years' time, things will look very different. So I think social media does some really wonderful things in terms of keeping accountable, because, you know, you're going to follow the people that are creating great content, and you can engage with them online, which is lovely. So you feel like you're part of a community. And that's in our DNA as human beings. You know, when you're living solo, I did for many, many, many years, you still need people around you that are going to fill up your cup emotionally and help you with logical stuff and keep you accountable, whatever that might look like. So in terms of this, you may find that you've got an online friendship group, or maybe you find that you've got a networking business online group of like-minded business owners that actually you can still have this conversation with. But of course, the greatest thing on earth is when you've got people that you love that are close at hand. You know, your best friend, your partner, maybe you've got a parent. Maybe you've got a cousin or another family member. You know, any of these people are going to, because they already love you, they already want you to succeed, they already want the best for you. This is the easy part, because when you share with them what your plans are, they should only have your back. They'd be prepared to help you every step of the way. So if, for example, you know, you are saving for your first home, so many of us, even if we've been in a house share, move back in with mum and dad so that we can do that. And maybe mum and dad or parents, or whoever it may be that you're living with, family member, will say, do you know what, don't pay us any rent, just put all of that money into savings. They're going to make sure that you're set up for success. And this is really important, because whatever you're trying to do, if it's getting out of debt, and if you're feeling that awful, we mentioned it earlier, that awful sensation of shame, no need to feel shame, but that's another thing. If you reach out to help with someone that you love and loves you, you will have that backing.
Absolutely. And, you know, if there was, you know, one piece of financial wisdom that you wish everybody knew that would instill this level of confidence and combat that feeling of shame, what would it be?
Money is not the goal. I don't think it ever should be the goal. The goal is life, to have a good one. You're only here for a while, make the best of it. You know, whether you're looking at having freedom of choice, you want life experiences, you want to make sure that you're healthy, you want to make sure the people that you love are healthy, you're building a lovely life to live together. Money is just a tool that you use to shape that life. And I think anybody knows that if you chase the dollar, and again, different stages of life, you're going to chase the dollar because you want a nice house, you want a home, you want security. So we do it. But ultimately, the goal is life. And when it comes to finances, you don't have to be an expert. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to have it all together or figured out before you begin. You know, Lord knows most of us learn as we go along. Even now, new things come along, or new perspectives, and it shifts things for you. But just starting somewhere, having that ingrained respect for your life and for the choices that you make, I think is where it all starts. You know, we all have an earning window. You might want to retire at 50, you know, you might have to through ill health, or, you know, whatever it might be. But so if you've looked after things nicely, properly, during your earning window, you know, molded it, shaped it, made it work for the life that you want now and for the one that you'd like to have in the future. That's it. That's the whole thing.
Amazing. Well, Lucy, thank you so much. There have been so many incredible bits of information throughout this episode, and it's been an absolute pleasure kind of unpacking this and getting to the root of why you might feel that heaviness around money and those practical steps you can take to actually get to where you want to be.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining our Investing Insiders podcast. If you like the episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on your platform of choice. For the latest money news and deals, you can sign up to our weekly newsletter at investinginsiders.co.uk/newsletter-page. We've also got a suite of guides, tools, and calculators on our website at investinginsiders.co.uk. You can also keep up to date with us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.